Welcome, everyone. Welcome to Fuel. I'm going to start with the land acknowledgements. We honor this land and its original inhabitants from time immemorial, the Clackamas and Multnomah bands of Chinookan people and the Tualatin bands of the Kalapuya. Signers of the Willamette Valley Treaty of 1855, they were removed from their homelands to the Grand Ronde Indian Reservation. Their descendants live on as Grand Ronde tribal members today, carrying on the traditions and cultures of their ancestors. Again, welcome to Fuel 2021. Today we have two exciting panels, and then tomorrow we have the breadth of our programming and an official kickoff at 9:45 Pacific time. Again, tomorrow, followed directly by our first session of that day. Hope to see you all there. A huge thank you to our title sponsor, Slalom. So you're going to hear an exciting presentation from them during our cleantech showcases on the 15th. This session in particular is sponsored by Prosper Portland, and we're so grateful to have their continued support. We have partnered with Prosper Portland for 6 years on hosting an event where we made curated introductions between cleantech companies and investors. This year, after talking with our companies about what they need most, it's clear that the profusion of new policies and funding opportunities emerging from the new federal administration presented an incredible opportunity, but was also overwhelming to navigate. We decided to shift courses and address that need. And here, representing our longtime partner in this event, Prosper Portland, we're joined by Catherine Krajniak, who now leads their Green Cities cluster. Catherine's background in science and her experience in economic development and deep relationship with the Portland startup community made her a great collaborator on building an equitable climate tech cluster in the region. Catherine, thank you for your partnership in this and for being here today. Oh, you're muted.
There we go. Happy Monday, everyone. As Joe mentioned, my name is Catherine Krajniak, and I'm the Green Cities Industry Liaison for Prosper Portland. Prosper Portland, for those of you who don't know, is the City of Portland's economic development agency. So my role there is to serve as a public sector connector, a strategist for our partners and companies that are in climate tech and sustainable cities. So what we call our Green Cities cluster, this is everything from green building services, architecture to climate tech, is a really important part of our economy. It's over 20,000 jobs in the Portland area. And this sector is a really important partner for the city in advancing its aggressive climate goals. And for us, our climate goals are not just to decarbonize our economy, but also to really prioritize and center the voices of those who have been disproportionately impacted by the impacts of climate change. And often these are also the same communities that haven't had equitable wealth creation opportunities for their families or their communities. And so at Prosper Portland, and I think generally for our partners in Portland, we do believe that equitable economic development and economic development related to climate change have to happen simultaneously. So we have a number of different ways that we approach equitable economic development. I just want to mention two. One is that we have a program to support companies to grow an inclusive culture at their companies so diverse talent can thrive and be successful. That's a program called Portland Means Progress. We also have a network of 20 organizations providing culturally specific and culturally responsive business coaching to entrepreneurs of color and women entrepreneurs. That's a program called Inclusive Business Resource Network. And we have, as Joe mentioned, a long-standing collaboration with VirtuLab and are really excited to sponsor this session. As Joe had mentioned, this was the big source of feedback that we had gotten from companies that there's an opportunity in climate policy and climate investment from the federal government. And we really consider this as a kickoff to more work to happen this year as we see how that legislation shapes up. So I just want to end with an invitation. I'm fairly new in this role, really excited to meet folks. And please reach out to me if you're a company in the Portland area or if you're thinking about locating here or doing business here. Also, if you're really passionate about equitable economic development and climate change and how those two intersect, I would love to talk to you. So my information's on the conference website. And if you want to learn more about our Green Cities cluster, you can go to webuildgreencities.com and you can learn more there. So thanks, and enjoy the session.
Thanks, Catherine. I'm really proud to invite our two guest speakers here today, Beth Viola and Tate McDonald. Both of our guests are from the law firm Holland and Knight in Washington, D.C. Tate McDonald is a partner in the Public Policy and Regulation Group, and Beth Viola is a senior policy advisor in the firm's Energy and Natural Resources Industry Sector Group. Together, they have decades of experience in climate change and energy policy, as well as innovation and commercialization of climate tech. I met them through the course of their work in support of a collaboration of climate tech accelerators, including ourselves, led by Los Angeles Clean Tech Incubator, and including Clean Energy Trust and many other partners, helping to advocate for increased funding and support from federal policy for our sector. And I know that they have a lot of insights into the quickly changing landscape there, and we're really excited to bring them here to kind of give you a sense for where things stand right now and what things we're expecting are going to shape up in the coming months. As Catherine mentioned, this is sort of the kickoff of what we believe is going to be a longer collaboration around navigating federal funding. So with that, I'm going to hand it off to you, Beth, and Tate.
Great, thank you so much for having us. We're excited to join you today. So I think what we'll do, Tate's gonna put the presentation up here, and I think what we'll do is we'll walk through a couple things. Primarily, we want to talk at a very high level about what is happening at the federal government, primarily as it relates to what's going on right now in Congress, as well as what the administration is doing. So I will sort of do the high level overview and talk a little bit about Congress, and then turn it over to Tate to talk more specifically about some of the climate and energy proposals and programs, more importantly, at the federal agencies. So Tate, so there's a quick overview of the agenda, hold on, I forgot to put my phone on mute. I guess that's my Apple Watch. So let's talk a little bit about big picture. So President Biden, Vice President Harris elected as one of the most progressive, on one of the most progressive campaigns related to climate change and energy, and the idea being that we needed to put significant amount of money into trying to create a net zero economy by 2050. And the idea being that we are going to do this to not only improve our nation's infrastructure, our hard infrastructure as it relates to bridges and roads, but also as it relates to energy and climate, and how do we transition to a low carbon economy, and also ensure that we are doing this in an environmentally just way while creating lots of really good domestic jobs, and also a domestic supply chain to do all of these things. You know, one of the first things that President Biden did when he came into office was to rejoin the Paris Climate Agreement. We've seen an outline of the commitments that they've made, but so much of what we're going to talk about today that's being debated right now on Capitol Hill, those programs are all going to be incredibly important to the US being able to meet its commitment to Paris. Next slide. So as we talked about, I think as we go through this, we usually do this as a little bit of climate and energy policy 101. And so we're going to talk mostly today about the legislative piece and some of the programs at the federal agencies, but there really are three tools for action as it relates to energy and reducing climate emissions. The first is legislation. The second is obviously regulation and executive action. We have already seen this administration take a number of executive actions through executive orders, especially as it relates to things like supply chains. And then there's the power of the federal spending, which is through government procurement and ensuring that the federal government walks the walk, just not just talks the talk. So we can talk a little bit about that too. So I think, let's see, what is the next slide here too? All right, so as we talk about legislation today, I think there are a couple of very big components that are going to be the focus here. One is, first of all, and Tate can talk about a little bit about this as she goes through, but at the end of 2020, we did see a large package get through that had significant energy components, and some of those things are very, very important down payments to what we're trying to see get done now. But some of the pieces that we had hoped to see were omitted. So the big pieces right now, there are three major pieces of legislation that are being discussed right now. One is what we call a competitiveness bill, which Tate and I affectionately refer to as the China bill. We can go back and talk about that a little bit. There is the bipartisan infrastructure bill, and then there is a budget reconciliation package, which is being debated right now. And then, as I said, there have been a number of executive orders, Defense Production Act, government leveraging its federal buying power. We've seen the federal government's going to take a number of actions related to electric vehicles and try to electrify its fleet. So things along those lines. Next slide, Tate. So as we look at approaches to emissions mandates, there are a couple of different pieces here to keep in mind. One is there are straight mandates. You've got energy efficiency requirements. You've got CAFE standards as it relates to vehicles. You've got things like renewable fuel standard. All of those things are mandates. I will say in the category of mandates, Democrats love on Capitol Hill, for the most part, love mandates, and Republicans on Capitol Hill do not. So keep that in mind as we go through some of the conversation about what's being discussed. The other big thing is market-based approaches. Do we think about a carbon tax? Do we create a cap and trade for carbon? Some of these things are being talked about, but for the most part, the legislation that is currently being debated do not include those things. And then the last thing is the voluntary incentives. And a lot of the work that is being done right now is very much focused on tax credits. Whoops, Tate, can you bring that? No, that's good, fine. To the climate and energy legislation chart there. So the next slide, yeah, there we go. So yes, right there. Sorry, it's weird, I can't see you on this. Anyhow, a couple big things. First of all, the Senate, in a very bipartisan way, passed a bipartisan infrastructure package, which has now gone over to the House of Representatives. So I want to give you a little bit of context about what the political dynamic is, and then about what some of the key components are in all of these. Inside the bipartisan package is a reauthorization of the surface transportation authorization, which has to be done before the end of September. That bill, getting that bill negotiated in the Senate is a really significant down payment on a lot of the things that we care about in the energy and climate space. Some of the key pieces there are addresses some of the transmission issues and provides $7.5 billion for electric vehicle infrastructure for charging. And there's like a clean school bus program as well. So all of those things are included in the bipartisan package. And that is now passed the House, Senate, gone over to the House. And then we have these crazy political dynamics in the House of Representatives where the Speaker Pelosi has said that they are going to take up the bipartisan package which there are a lot of folks in Congress on both sides of the aisle, and especially President Biden, who are eager to see that get passed. So Speaker Pelosi has committed to trying to get that package passed in the House of Representatives. However, not until the House passes a budget reconciliation package. So the bipartisan package is just under $1 trillion. The budget reconciliation package that is currently being debated right now in the House and in the process of being marked up through the relevant committees is right now at $3.5 trillion. So a really significant amount of money, more money than we've ever seen go out the door for things that we care about in this space. So those two big packages will together bring unprecedented amounts of money to trying to transition our economy to low carbon and really through the lens of carbon dioxide emissions. So supposedly the House of Representatives is going to push really hard to pass that reconciliation package before September 27th, so that the House can then take up the bipartisan bill. Hopefully the bipartisan bill passes and the president signs it before the end of the month. There are a number of deadlines associated with that. And then the budget reconciliation package will go over to the Senate, where it will face a very hard time trying to get through a very evenly split Congress, where the Democrats cannot afford to not afford to have any Democrats not vote for it. So therefore, the budget reconciliation is a Democratic only package. When it gets to the Senate, we fully expect that the amount of money that, you can switch the slide, Tate, the amount of money that's going to be in there will be closer to $1.5 trillion. We totally expect that $3.5 trillion amount of money that comes out of the House not to withstand the Senate, in order to get folks like Senators Joe Manchin, Kristen Sinema, and even somebody like a Mark Warner from Virginia, who's expressed concerns about the amount of money that's being added to our debt. Many of you may have seen Senator Manchin was all over the media this weekend talking about energy and this package and expressing real concern about the amount of money. The Democrats cannot pass this package without the Senator Manchin, so they are going to have to work very hard to find a path forward with his input. Joe just sent a note here reminding me about the debt limit. It is our understanding, I mean, there are a couple of big things that are going to expire, but the Congress does need to vote on the debt limit before the end of September. And so the idea is that they really want to tie that to the bipartisan package in order to get Democrats and Republicans in particular to agree to increase the debt lit before the end of September. So let me just mention a couple of things. There are a lot of different pieces in all of these packages that are really important. You've got a lot of investment in electric vehicles, electric vehicle infrastructure, a lot of tax incentives for the next decade as it stands now by the House Democrats that would provide tax incentives for wind, solar, hydrogen, storage, nuclear energy, and carbon capture and utilization and direct air capture. Those are all really significant tax incentives that will be part of the Democrats' reconciliation package. And then you will have so in my mind, the way I think about the reconciliation package from the Democrat is in two ways. One is these tax incentives, which, as anyone who's been following energy for the last 15 to 20 years knows, that the only major energy policy that's really been done in this country over the last, 15 years has been through the tax code. So there'll be a tax incentive package there, which the idea being that it's like over a period of 10 years to create some certainty from industry so that we can actually build out the infrastructure that we need on the low carbon side so that people don't have to keep coming back to Congress asking for extensions of those tax incentives. And then the other piece that is we anticipate being included, which is going to cost a significant amount of money, is essentially a clean energy standard. And that is the now being affectionately referred to as the CEP, Clean Electricity Payment Plan or Program. But the idea being that the utilities will get paid to make those transition. And if they are not transitioning by so many megawatts every year, then they will be penalized and have to pay the federal government. So the tax incentives and the CEP are the kind of major big components as it relates to climate in the reconciliation package. I think the thing I want to mention too, before I turn over to Tate to talk more specifically about some of the more specific programs, is that everything that is being debated on the Democratic reconciliation package, as I said at the beginning, there was a desire to try to ensure that everything is done in an environmental just way. And President Biden wants to make sure that 40% of the money that comes out of this package is provided to underserved communities to ensure that they are not only able to find jobs, but also are not impacted, don't bear the brunt of climate impacts. So there are significant provisions in this reconciliation package to deal with environmental justice, but also to create things like incentives are tied to bonus credits for things like prevailing wage and ensuring domestic content. So the idea that we need to scale up our domestic manufacturing to support this low carbon economic transition is very significant. And so those are things that are controversial right now. And while they are very likely going to succeed in these efforts, it does make a challenge for some of the incumbent clean energy folks, a hurdle for them to get over to really quickly deploy. So you're going to hear a lot about that in the next coming weeks in the press. But at the end of the day, I very much expect that things like prevailing wage, labor requirements and domestic content requirements manage to make it through this package in particular. So with that, let me stop and turn it over to Tate. And I'm confident, because it's been a crazy morning, that I've forgotten a thing or two. So Tate, let me know if I've forgotten anything big picture, and then I'll let you start.
I don't think so. And I apologize for my slides. My keyboard keys were sticking, so that's why they were jumping around. But so thank you, everyone, and thank you for having us to present today. And Beth, I guess I'll start here. I think you did cover everything, but we might jump through a few more slides because we're going back and forth on the slides. But thank you all for having us today. What I'll talk about is what's in the packages we know about, that we are confirmed within the bipartisan infrastructure deal and the 2020 Energy Act. And that's really the money that we know is going to start coming through DOE next year, and what we expect for that money that we know will be coming through DOE. And then I'll talk a little bit more about additionally what we expect to come down the pipe through reconciliation, because as Beth said, we essentially have three pieces of legislation that are going to create funding streams for companies to essentially chase dollars through the Department of Energy, the Department of Transportation, possibly the Department of Commerce. We're getting really complicated here, and the landscape is going to change entirely. And then, and I don't want to say possibly, there will be clean energy funding through Department of Commerce because of the China bill. And then there will likely be a lot more through the reconciliation package, because the amount of really the amount subdivided, but what I'm going to talk about today are the big sectors and the big areas of interest that we're going to see a lot of spending in. And then we can answer questions, of course, on how these programs will come down and go through funding opportunity announcements. So the main areas that we're really seeing a lot that we have clarity on is hydrogen, energy storage, grid resilience, nuclear energy, carbon capture and utilization, and battery and supply chain management. So all of that all of these categories are significantly addressed in the bipartisan infrastructure deal, which, as Beth said, is likely to pass at the end of September, although it's just, we live in a crazy environment that's changing by the day. And then in addition to this, you also have grant funding that we don't know really what it's going to, as much of what it's going to look like, that's going to go through the, like Beth said, what we call the China package and the China legislation. And really the purpose of that package is to remain competitive with China. And as you can imagine, to remain competitive with China, we need to keep on funding clean technologies. So what is going to be known, and I'll talk about today, what's really going to be known is where the funding is going to go in Department of Energy. Because and so every time we go through a legislative package, when we counsel clients, we have to go through, okay, what do we know versus we don't know? And that's how we help clients navigate the programs, because a lot of the different aspects of funding and DOE funding and different clean technology funding, it really changes by how it's written in the legislation. And that's what that's essentially what we spend all of our time doing. So you can imagine it's a little overwhelming right now because of the fact that there are so many unknowns about this money, because it is so significantly increased than what we ever expected before. And we're not even at the end of it. So that's why we wanted to open the presentation today in terms of what's like, we had to open the presentation today with the legislation, because just to show that what we know is a small portion of this funding. And the good thing about that, so the good thing with knowing and not knowing, right, is not knowing it will provide you some opportunity to shape and companies to shape and chase from the ground level. But then, and then on DOE, you have to look at, okay, what do we know about these programs? What programs are in place? Who should we start talking to sooner than later? Because a lot of the DOE funding, which I'll talk about a little bit more, is going to go through existing programs and existing folks who have been in the government, administered money through the government, awarded money through the government. You're going to have those same individuals providing a lot of capital moving forward. So and actually one more thing that we haven't even talked about here is not only do we have all of these, the new legislation, we also had through annual appropriations, because of the Biden, the clean energy plan and the Biden request from the onset, we had additional capital of another $1 billion through ERE, which has been the most substantial clean tech funding agency and office as a whole throughout the federal government. So right now, and just to put this into perspective before we go a little bit down in the details, and again, we can only go in so many details because we only know so much now. We're really at, like, if we had an onion with 30 layers, we're probably about 3 layers in to peeling back all the layers of the onion. And we'll know essentially over the next year or two, we'll have in complete clarity on how all these programs are going to shape up. But the good thing is on this funding, it's very different. And this is one of the reasons why we don't know some of the ways it's going to be done. One of the things that's very different is the fact that this is 5-year funding. So this funding will be available for the most part for the next 5 years for clean tech commercialization, and then some beyond. In 2009, 2010, for those of you who are around The funding really stopped after the first 2 years. And this is written in a way that attempts to prevent that and make sure we can adequately commercialize energy technology. Okay, so the next slide is just, it's actually, so this is just to give you a flavor of the increases in funding just in appropriations. So first we had appropriations. And so you can see the Office of Energy Efficiency and Renewable Energy, an extra $1 billion, additional money out of ARPA-E, and additional money out of the Fossil Energy Office, just through appropriations. And now we have essentially through the bipartisan infrastructure deal, and we'll talk a little bit about pursuing the funding in the next, because I know that's mostly of interest, but what's key here is you can't come up with a strategy to pursue the funding if you don't know what office it's in. So that's why we have to start through the legislation and the funding as a whole, and to follow the money down to where the grant application, where the funding opportunity announcement is going to come down. And to really increase levels of odds of success in pursuing funding, it's really about how that program operates, and how that program is going to administer funding, and how essentially your strategy needs to be centered around how each of the programs are structured and how they grant funding each year. Now, the nice thing about the DOE money, and I know from our prep, I know this team and this group is very well versed in SBIR funding, and there's been a lot of work with that. The good thing is DOE grants are similar to SBIR funding and that they come out on an annual basis. But before I talk a little bit more about the process, the two offices up on the screen now, just to give you an idea of how much things are increasing. Historically, the office on the previous screen, the Office of Renewable Energy and Energy Efficiency, that's been the biggest clean tech funding office. It was $3 billion. It's been $3 billion. It started off at $2 billion. It went up to $2 billion at the end of Bush. The Bush administration actually pushed that office up to $2 billion. Over the past decade, it went up another $1 billion a year, each year. These are annual grants that the timeline starts to look out for all of these programs, and it will be the same for all the programs we talk about today. You have to start looking at the offices that fall under your technology area. I'm sure many of you on the call know this already. But the bottom line is the grants and the process starts each year after the funding is passed from Congress. That should happen at the end of the fiscal year. It usually happens a lot later, but think of it as a January to September each year timeline, where January is when the funding solicitations start to come out and the offices start to provide clarity about what they're going to fund. Sometimes they'll do RFIs, sometimes they'll do workshops. DOE is doing a lot of workshops here, but all of that funding has gone through the majority of clean tech funding, and we've helped clients win hundreds upon hundreds of millions of dollars out of this office over the last decade. The majority of this funding the clean tech funding goes through this office, and like I said, up to $4 billion. Now we have the Office of Electricity, which typically previously was funded only at about $200 million, and this is for grid resilience. Now is going up to $8.1 billion split across 5 years. So we are seeing an office that previously didn't participate in a lot of things and have a lot of funding go up to essentially quadruple, if not more. And this number's escalated in a number of different ways. So I would say that really we're looking at 5 to 6 times the amount of funding that this office used to have. And this office focuses on transmission, reliability, and resilience, resilient distribution, and energy storage. So really the deployment of grid resilience at all levels. And this is not even counting the cyber money, which of course is related to this office. But this office is actually defined pretty broadly. So just because you don't fall, and it's going to be hard to track this money, quite frankly, for folks that aren't used to tracking it. But the bottom line is, the good news here is that there will be a 5-year process where we'll know more and more each year, and it will be easier to chase the dollars after we know each year. But the bottom line is that this office typically works through national labs. So you'll see a lot more action through national labs, but this is actually very broadly defined. This is pretty much more broadly defined than it looks here. And then it looks like what was in the media as well. So that's why as soon as the bipartisan package passes, you're going to start to see a lot of action through all of these DOE programs. And it's important to track that. It's important to track that so we can keep so it's important to just keep an eye on the standard programs that are already set up, so there isn't a problem so you can actually track that and start to chase that, even though we have 5 years. So again, if you miss it the first year, not a big deal, but it'll get shaped more and we'll have more clarity on everything. And then the Office of Clean Energy Demonstrations, this is the big ticket item that was really not well publicized, but $20 billion, so $4 billion a year, large grants out of DOE going through all of it right now, going into all of these different sections, different subsets. And these are, when I say large grants, it's $20 to $50 million a piece. So it's real money, real commercialization dollars for the first time in the history, really in the history of the US government. So, and what I think of this as is we're finally going to be able to compete and do the same type of, we're finally going to have the same type of funding that's been awarded through Europe for clean tech companies, and of course China for a decade now. And this isn't even through the competitiveness bill. The other thing you're going to continue to see a lot of action on is the loan program. It's not going to go away. They're going to start to figure out how to support smaller technologies, probably next year or the following year. The program just got written in another $30 billion into the initial House draft. So the bottom line is you're going to see the loan program reactivate. That will continue. They will spend this money. So not only will we have grants, but we will have a significant number of loans. And then, like Beth mentioned before, I'm not going to spend a lot of time on this, but the federal, because this is actually the item that's the furthest behind, but there was the most action done on this during the Obama administration. So just keep an eye out, and really the easiest way to start to track all this is go on to all of the different government sub-programs, which I have a slide on and we can provide as a follow-up. Here we go. I have a better slide than this that I can provide as a follow-up, but you want to go to start to track all of these programs. The easiest first step is to just go sign up for all of the email announcements that come out of each of the DOE programs, and each of the DoD programs aren't tracked as well, but each of the different subsets of programs, and like I said, I can provide a better slide that we use on this that provides specific program names, but the best way to start is by signing up on those, know that they are coming, participate in RFIs, and the next step on all of the DOE money and the grants that we went through today is really going to be to essentially make sure that you are following the funding opportunity announcements, following when they come out, reading them to make sure. I know this sounds like fundamental, but the majority of grant applications are actually kicked out for not being eligible. And a lot of people think that you can just put in anything you like, that it doesn't, you don't have to apply to or reply to each individual request on a grant application. And you have the best idea, so you can submit even if it says that they're not looking for your technology. Do not spend your time on that. Make sure you are honing in, make sure you are following everything. It's a lot of reading. It is a paperwork exercise, but that is the only way to increase your ability to win these grants. Reach out to program administration. You work with folks like us. The bottom line is you have to make sure, it will be a waste of your time if you're not. reading everything and applying to the correct solicitations that fit what you are trying to do. There is no, oh, I have the best technology, so the government will see that in government programs. I cannot tell you how many times we have seen the best technologies not being funded for years, quite frankly, out of some of these programs. And then in that case, when you're not falling under an eligible category, there are ways to shape the fund. There's ways to shape the funding each year through lobbying. One of the things we've done the last few years, quite frankly, and one of the success stories we've had is getting more significant funding to battery supply chain and battery manufacturing. Not worth the time to necessarily non-dilutive grant funding, just looking for the grant funding, chasing the individual offices. What the clean tech industry Beth, can you hear me?
I can hear you now, yes.
Okay, sorry about that. I don't know, internet connections. So I know it has not necessarily been what's most accepted, but even in, as Joe mentioned at the beginning, incubators are a great example. We had to do their lobbying was necessary to make sure things were to make sure funding is going to incubators moving forward. So these are essentially the three ways to engage. The last is federal finance engagements. But the bottom line is, you got to look at each of these three areas and plus the grant opportunities to determine which path is going to be best to increase your odds of getting funding. And going into it blindly essentially will lead to what we see time and time again, which is companies getting frustrated with the process, the federal government, and pursuing grants. So the bottom line, though, is by taking a more strategic approach to reviewing the grants, getting up to speed on what each program is going to provide, and then only applying to those that you know you will meet, and then applying in a way that you answer every single question the way that they are teeing up the question, and the webinars and the feedback has said DOE wants the response. The key here is just making sure that you are applying to the right grant opportunities in the right way and answering all the questions. Again, I know it sounds like it's fundamental, but a lot of people, I cannot tell you how many times people get frustrated with grant chasing because they've missed one of these fundamental steps. So I just feel the need to always make sure to stress all of this. Okay, and that is the end of the prepared remarks for today. I know we have some questions that I haven't been able to see on my screen. I think it's more chat. Great, yeah, so we're getting a lot of feedback about the 5-year funding, much better. I mean, that's really when we were weighing in to, with folks drafting legislation, that was one of our that was probably our biggest area of feedback, is that if we're going to do this, we need to do it right. It needs to be over 5 years, and that will also support a lot of areas that aren't quite ready now because of the one thing I know Beth talked about, the 2020 Energy Act. But what happened we hadn't had energy legislation for years before. So that's essentially why we're so far behind on energy storage and other items like that. Beth, what else did I miss?
I don't know. I think you got a lot in there. It is a lot. It's a lot. I think one thing for people to keep in mind, I mean, Tate touched upon this too, is that, you know, most of the money that we're talking about on Capitol Hill is existing programs. Like, how do we expand existing programs rather than trying to create new things out of whole cloth? So really doubling down on the money, or in some cases 4 or 5 times the amount of money, and expand some of that. And I will say there's one of the interesting things about the conversations right now on the Democratic only reconciliation bill as we look at the tax side is along the same vein, you know, the Ways and Means Committee, the House of Representatives is looking at existing tax structures and expanding them for the next decade for the most part, like I said, to create certainty. However, in the Senate, Senator Wyden, who's the chair of the Finance Committee, is looking at is getting rid of those existing incentives and creating a incentive that is only tied to carbon reductions. And so that would potentially, as I mentioned earlier, may slow things down a little bit just because it means that the IRS will have to write completely new rules rather than just revise the existing credits or incentives that they already have in place.
I wanted to hop in for a second and just prompt the audience. If you are working in a specific technology area or have a particular interest in a particular technology area, to go ahead and put that in the chat. I think it would be really interesting. I see a question about geothermal energy there, and then Morgan asked a question earlier about you know, alternatives to carbon capture technology in terms of what might be funded within the carbon capture and utilization market segment. I see blue economy. Yeah, go ahead and put in any kind of technology areas that you are particularly relevant to your company or your technology. And that way we can see if there's a way that we can address those kinds of opportunities specifically.
I mean, Tate, maybe you know more on the do you know the answer on the geothermal?
Yeah, so the geothermal, the DOE, so, and again, that's why I know it sounded like we were laying the foundation of a lot, but hopefully it's clear why. Because DOE on the slide about the increase to ERE, the 3 billion to 4 billion, that will incrementally up the geothermal program. It will not be as significant as a plus up as like we're going to see in the hydrogen and the carbon capture, which I see the question on too. But it will be like about 20% more. So, and that's what's fascinating about this, at least 20% more, plus more out of ARPA-E, plus in that Office of Clean Energy Demonstrations that's just getting created. There is a $200 million like slush fund each year for all of renewables. We're hoping that gets increased in, reconciliation. But we won't go in the dynamics of why it's not. It looks a little unfair right now. But the bottom line is like ERE, ARPA-E, loan program, if you're at that point. And then on the carbon capture and sequestration, that actually has a ton more out of the Office of Clean Energy Demonstration. This office is not set up yet. So you won't see, you'll just start to see it talked about in the next 2 to 3 months, maybe 4 to 5 after the bid passes. There's still a lot of back and forth about how that will get set up. But the bottom line is especially on CCUS and DAC, direct air capture, there is a significant amount more funding.
Yeah, and it's not just funding, there's tax incentives for those, and they're both for DAC and for CCUS. It's, you know, X amount, and I'm not going to say any amounts right now because there are so many different proposals out there, and we can send follow up on what's in the House bill after they mark up and where they land this week, and then it'll be debated again over in the Senate. But the reality is they are divided it by X amount per ton for geologic storage, and then X amount for enhanced oil recovery for reuse. So it will, I mean, we're talking anywhere like we're talking a lot of money per ton on some of that, especially a direct air capture, potentially as much as $150 or $180 a ton.
I think the only one we didn't talk about yet is automated heavy duty electric charging. So heavy duty electric charging has been kind of the area that some folks are concerned is missed out on. There's going to be deployment opportunities through the loan program once the technology is ready. There's also going to be increased grants for it. I do think we will end up seeing a little bit of this through DOT. One thing we did not mention, because again, there's just so much, is there's $7.5 billion out of DOT on electric charging deployment. That is not heavy duty marked specifically from the onset, but I think I think some of that's going to end up. There is going to be opportunities for heavy duty. It's one of the outstanding question marks, exactly what it looks like. And then you also have the old ERE offices.
Yeah, I agree. I think
Can you speak to the clean energy demonstrations opportunities and how companies can take advantage of those kinds of grants? And what those look like?
Yeah, the first step in that, so it's probably going to be a new office. The first and the key that's being worked out now is how they will essentially review and determine who wins those. But the way DOE is supposed to work is you're supposed to have ARPA-E, and Joe, I have 2 or 3 slides that I should have put in here that I'll follow up on. You're supposed to have ARPA-E, ERE, and then move to the loan program. And because the loan program's essentially been broken and bottlenecked for reasons I could talk all day about, but I will not for a decade. They've now, and because of the fact that the rest of the world essentially is competing with non-dilutive funding in significant amounts going right to companies, they're setting up that Office of Clean Energy Demonstration to help us overcome the bottlenecks. Like I said, this is much bigger than we ever expected. This was an area where even my jaw dropped to the ground when I saw it in the bill, because I just did not expect it to be this much. But the bottom line is that that office will be a new office. What they're going to do, because of this supposed timeline or support to commercialization, the best part of starting to engage on that and talk about that, if you are in one of the subsectors that we work through, is start to work through your standard ERE office. So start to talk to the hydrogen office about it. Start to talk to the fossil energy office about it if you are in carbon capture and direct air capture, because the folks who run each of those offices, and if you've gotten grants through each of those offices before, they will have a say in how that funding's shaped.
And if you haven't had funding there previously, that's really, it's going to be more challenging.
It's just going to decrease your odds of success. So then a lot of companies think by saying, oh, it's only 3 to 5 million, the DOE is going to hold me back. Like, I don't want to get distracted in the ERE offices. Of course, the majority of companies aren't like that, but this is just another reason. And we've always said this, like, just engage a little bit, find a project that works, because there's benefits of there will be benefits of working with DOE. They will unlock these barriers, because we've been working behind the scenes with a lot of the congressional staff on the loan program for 5 years to unlock it, to make this work. So we knew this was going to happen. We just didn't expect this much money, quite frankly.
All right, so we've had a couple of questions about geothermal, and I just wondered if within ERE you've seen any mention of funding programs that will be targeted at that.
Yeah, that will go through the geothermal office in ERE. So the best way, and then there should actually be new ARPA-E funding for geothermal too. So the best thing to do is to talk to those, the best place to start is to talk to the geothermal office again, get a sense of what they are doing, as well as see if there's somebody in ARPA-E interested in specifically what you're doing. I think that's the best. That's definitely the best that we can see right now. Again, that's why I opened it up. Like, we are only a few layers of the onion deep, and there's going to be a lot more that comes out of the next package. And I do see a question about, is the new Office of Clean Energy deployment the same as the Clean Energy Accelerator? Is not. The Clean Energy Accelerator will likely, I just had a conversation about this morning. It's still really confusing about how that's going to go through reconciliation, if it's going to be able to go through. What I found out this morning is actually it might go through EPA, which then there would be a whole nother place that I don't even know how they would get it through EPA and set it up. So if that does, I mean, I know how, but it's going to take a while is my point. So the bottom line is if that passes, it will be a few years.
Also
So what we try to focus on today is what will be 2022 that we really expect, and then know more and more will come as things next goes down.
I saw an important follow-up question to the comment about ERE being the pathway into the demonstrations funding, and somebody asked if that meant that there's no chance for new startups. And I don't want to put words into your mouth, but I think the answer to that would be no, right? Yeah, it's really that you'd have a greater chance by first getting ERE funding directly for the earlier stage technology development, and then moving into the demonstration project, which is one of the reasons why that 5-year funding is so valuable. Okay. All right, we're getting a bunch of questions here in the chat. I
think, Joe, I see, Beth, do you want to answer the, talk about the clean tech partnerships and technology clusters and where we are in incubators? Or do you want, I can talk about it.
No, go ahead. Sorry, I'm just.
So the potential support for clean tech climate technology clusters and professional associations, we actually found out last week, I mean, this is how real time all of this is happening, that actually may be more covered through the China legislation that the House is working on now than the reconciliation offices. So this has been
the competitiveness bill.
I know, the competitiveness bill, I know. This has been up in the air, and this has been more challenging than we expected it to be this time around, but the work that the incubator clusters are doing is finally moving the needle some forward. It's just looks like it's going to be the China competitiveness package over reconciliation. And essentially it's not a huge amount, but we're talking about upping it from like 5 million a year to like 25 million a year, just for support of that broader suite of groups.
Yeah, it's been mentioned a couple of times in the chat, and they're getting some questions about support for companies applying to get funding through some of these channels. Virtue Lab offers our program. There's a link in the chat to the program, our SBIR support center. If you're in Oregon, Washington, Idaho, or Alaska, we can support you directly. I think that there are organizations funded in 20 different states that at a minimum offered sort of support from the Small Business Administration to provide coaching to companies pursuing this. And so I would definitely look to see about that. And Leon, I don't know if you could, if you have any insight into where people can find their nearest their nearest fast thing, that would be good. We are also going to have a SBIR focused session at noon today. So definitely log back in for that. And so let's move on then. I think we're actually at time, and I think we have some networking opportunities today and in the coming days, and there'll be plenty of times to get your questions answered. I believe that Tate and Beth are both in the Jujima platform if you want to reach out. Tate and Beth, I don't know if you want to put your contact information, make sure that's available to folks so they can reach out directly if they want to follow up with more questions. That would be awesome.
Sure, happy to do it. Thank you again for having us.
Great.
Sorry for freezing.
Yeah, no worries.
Thank
Okay,
you.
so thank you again, Prosper Portland, for sponsoring this session and continuing to support this this effort. And I hope that all of you are going to be able to join us at noon for the next panel, which is called Women Taking University Research Technologies to Commercialization, where we're going to hear from several women researchers, along with a few funding resources for those looking to commercialize the technology. So thank you so much. Thank you, Beth. Thank you, Tate. And thank you, Catherine.
Thank you so much.